A lot of people won't know how long the British were in Jamaica. Can you just explain to people the colonial history of Britain in Jamaica?
Well, Jamaica was captured by the British in 1655 from the Spanish and didn't become independent until 1962, so over 300 years as a British colony.
Yeah, well, why do you think this Windrush scandal or this Home Office scandal, why do you think this has happened? A lot of people don't understand what Windrush means. Can you try and explain to people?
Well, this is really has happened because of the travel documents. Because a lot of people who arrived during the 50s and 60s travelled on a British colonial passport. And if they have children, especially very young children, they would have been on their passports. So over the years, 40, 50 years has elapsed. And when those kids go up to apply for passports, they couldn't prove where they're from. But they can't. They wouldn't have had any documents as a 5-year-old. In fact, in my particular case, when I arrived in the UK after a year of coming back to help my mother country, I was called up for national service. And I resented that and regretted it and fought hard to get out of it. But I was told, unless you leave the country, because Jamaica had not yet gained independence, you are deemed to be British because you're from a colony. And under the Immigration Act of 1948, you are deemed to be British as a person born here, therefore you're eligible for national service. So I went in kicking and screaming, you know the rest of the history. I served for 30 years.
What system were you taught in Jamaica? What education system were you taught in Jamaica?
Well, we had the same system as in the UK, except that we were told all the history of slave trade. But we also were told the kings and queens in Europe and so on. And I think that is, if that was told in the curriculum in the UK, things would have been better because a generation of people have grown up not knowing much about the slavery and they resent it now.
Can you share that poem about the war that you told me when I've been writing the book? The little verse you had to sing as a kid?
Oh, when we were growing up during the Second World War, yes. It was England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, West Indian boys are we. We all united to fight for the king and to conquer Germany. And that was being sung in all the schools.
And you would sing that at what age were you when you were singing that?
Oh, 45 before. I was 10 or 11, 9 or 10.
So that's how deep the indoctrination was.
I was on the 10 because we were all gone 35, yes. The war had been finished in 45. Most of the colonies were like that. That's why we had so many volunteers from the colonies. And they had to pay their way to come and contribute. And then to see this treatment they're getting in Windrush, that's why it's so painful.
You've often said to me, we struggled so hard when we first came here to improve things, and things seem to have gone backwards. Can you explain that a bit more? What was the struggle when you came, and what is the situation now?
When we came, there were blatant racism, which we didn't even acknowledge the racism. I used to think, we need to get, the local population need to get used to us first. So we used to make excuses. I didn't acknowledge this in the initial years. But when it started to repeat itself, then you realize there are obviously issues. It was quite normal to take up a paper looking for a room, and it would say no blacks, no Jews, or Irish, or dogs or cats wanted. One of the reasons why I eventually signed on in the RF is that accommodation, you become eligible for accommodation. And when I went for it, we spoke first with the landlord on the telephone, and he told I was white hair, and when I turned up in uniform, I didn't get the place because he'd signed a petition to get some of my countrymen off the road, he says. And the smell of curry was intolerable. In those days, of course, there were no takeaways, Chinese or Indian takeaways. And I think the indigenous population now eat far more curries than West Indians. So we've seen a cultural change. What we've got now is, we used to have overt racism in those days. What you have now, it's gone. People can't say certain things outwardly because of the laws. But there's still a struggle.
What do you think is the role of education in this? Is that
well, I think this is the heart of the problem. I think British history have not included the colonial past. So in many schools, I think, had how Britain treated the colonials or the history of the colonials was taught of British history, people would have had a better understanding and probably might have not been where we are now. I don't think many people understand that when you were colonies, everything was controlled from the UK and you were deemed to be part of this country as British. So why they should suddenly say after 40 or 50 years you're not British? But if people know the truth, their reaction is completely different. During my RF career, I used to say to people, one of my giveaway line, there was racism in the service as well. And the way I used to handle it, especially when I started to go up the ranks, is to say to people, I'm uncomfortable with that particular remark you've made. He said, well, I didn't make it at you. I said, no, but you made it because I'm black. So therefore you've made it at me. I'll accept. He said, well, it's just a slip up, little banter. I said, yes, well, I'll accept one Freudian slip, but won't accept a second of some question from you. It's offensive what you've just said. And I used to handle, and I had to manage my way. So even within the service, because we recruit from indigenous populations, so you've got to expect people coming with attitudes, even though we try to eradicate that.
How do we heal this nation?
The indigenous population need to be more embracing. And the stereotype, because one of the problems we have, people use a lot of stereotypical argument. They might have a bad experience with one black person and just target everybody with the same brush. If I did that with white people, I would have made progress. There are good and bad people, and it's a question of just sorting it out. And if you have a bad experience with one person or one couple, it doesn't mean to say that all black people are bad. And the same go for any nation, really. I mean, I remember having the experiences when I first arrived. In Jamaica, where I grew up, I was a Catholic and I was an altar boy. And I remember one priest saying to me at Kenninghall Road in East London at a mass, would you mind not coming to this come to the early mass because of these had complained from parishioners. And I thought to myself, so I went to a completely different church. But if my faith was strongly grounded, I would have stopped going to church, for example. And this is why a lot of black people make their own churches.
Thanks, Dad. That was a fascinating conversation. I get a sense that things are brewing. Education seems to be the main theme of what you're saying. If that's the only takeaway from this, that education becomes more prominent in schools, in society, do you think that would be the way to kind of improve things?
I'm hopeful that they are. But we need to gather some people who will keep fighting. Yeah, I'm hopeful.
And hopefully that gathering can begin
yes.
from today. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.